Good morning. It's morning where I am. Good day. My name is Danny Johnson, and I'm the VP for L&D Research at Burson by Deloitte. And today we're really excited to be hosting a webinar with Rust-of-Seat Software about empowering continuous learning via TinCan or xAPI. Just a quick round of introductions so you know who you'll be hearing from today. You'll be hearing a little bit from me and from my colleague Wendy Wayne-Adia. You'll also be hearing from Mike Rust-of-Seat, who is the president of Rust-of-Seat Software. And then we're really lucky to have Christopher Stevenson, the vice president of professional development and innovation at CUES, who will be helping us with a case study this morning. Before we dive in, let me give you just a little bit of background about who and what Burson by Deloitte is. We are a global provider of leading practices, trends, benchmarking research in talent management, learning, and strategic HR. We cover basically 6 areas. Those are listed over on the right-hand side of your screen. Human resources, leadership development, learning and development, which is where we'll focus today, talent acquisition, talent management, and then tools and technology. Our offerings include a membership, a What Works membership, which gives members access to our research, our tools, our education, and consulting. We also throw a huge party every year called the Impact Conference. It's the industry's leading conference on the business of talent. And then we also provide advisory services and consulting. All right. Just a little bit of how we're going to be spending our time together today. Myself and my colleague Wendy Wayne-Adia will be sharing a little bit of research with you, some of the things that we're working on with respect to continuous learning and learning measurement. And then we'll hand it over to Mike Rust-of-Seat, who will give us an overview of TinCan API or xAPI and help us understand how it can help us with the measurement challenge that most of us face. And then Mike will introduce Christopher Stevenson and the CUES case study as well. Just a quick note here, as we go through the webinar, please feel free to ask questions in the chat window. We'll be gathering them and answering them, as many as we can live at the end of this webinar. And then for the ones that we don't have time for, we'll answer through email in the next couple of days. So please feel free to give us your questions. That's how we learn. So let's start by talking about the modern learner. 3 words to describe the modern learner are distracted, overwhelmed, and impatient. You all probably know this, but designers have between 5 and 10 seconds to grab the attention of a learner. And then we learned in a seminar last week that people's attention span is about 8 seconds long. So we have 5 to 10 seconds to grab it, and then 8 seconds later we have to do it all over again. The final stat that I want to show you on the left-hand side of this screen is that in a typical work week, we have about 1% of an employee's time to focus on training and development, and that's in the traditional sense. So because of this, some definite preferences are emerging for the modern learner. The first one is untethered. Workers work from everywhere. They work from plants, they work from cars, they work from airports. Workers want to be able to learn from these places as well. They do not want to be tethered to a desk or to a classroom. The second one that we're seeing is on demand. Learners have a preference for learning in the moment when they need the info. That's why Google is one of the top learning tools in the world. It gets accessed much more often than online courses, and people are increasingly turning to their smartphone for answers to questions that they have in the moment. The third one is collaborative. Developing and accessing people networks is becoming incredibly important to jobs. Sometimes it's even more important than the knowledge itself when it comes to doing that job. And then the fourth one is empowered. The half-life of a workplace skill is now between 2.5 and 5 years. Workers often find their own training when they can't find it within the organization. And one of my very favorite stats on this entire sheet is down in that bottom left-hand corner. 62% of IT professionals say that they have spent their own money on outside courses to learn skills to help them with their own job. So it's not that learners don't want to learn or that modern learners have no interest in learning. It's that they aren't necessarily enamored with the kinds of things that L&D is currently giving them. So to help us think differently, to help us think differently about what we provide, about a year ago we introduced what we call the continuous learning model. And the reason that we like this model is because it's basically a description of how learners are already learning and really how they need to learn in order to be able to keep up with the business. There are basically 4 contexts or ways that learners learn. We call them the 4 E's for obvious reasons: education, exposure, experience, and environment. Education are the traditional L&D types of things that you think of. It's generally pretty formal in nature with a defined beginning and an end, and it's pretty easy to measure. We tend to default as L&D into the education bucket quite a bit. Experience, or experiential learning, is the type of learning that occurs on the job. Through stretch assignments, through job rotations, through the day-to-day doing of the job, there is learning that happens there. Exposure type learning, or learning that occurs through interactions with relationships with colleagues, professionals, and thought leaders. This is where your social networks pop in, your professional networks as well, those types of things. And then the last one is environment. This is point of need learning. And what it does is it leverages infrastructures in the workplace to enable employees to support themselves on their jobs. So this is where learning portals come in, this is where performance support tools come in, job aids, all of those things that exist in the environment to help the worker do their job better. So these contexts, these 4 contexts, have always existed. The only thing different now is that we're actually recognizing them and talking about them a little bit more. And if you look at it, it basically describes how the modern learner we just talked about gets his or her training. They do it through these 4 areas. And if that's true, it changes things just a little bit for L&D. So for many years, the industry, meaning the L&D industry, we've talked about learning methods and assets in terms of formal and informal. But with continuous learning, that model that we just explained, there's a new focus on development of the learner in a holistic sense. So it's no more formal learning and informal learning, but it's more of a continual learning experience made up of several approaches. So take a look at the graphic that I've put up here on the screen. This is something that we've put together to describe some of the methods available for learners today. This isn't necessarily methods that are being leveraged by L&D people. These are methods that people use to learn. There are 35 of them on the screen. Obviously, it's not all-inclusive, but it gives us a good sense for what's out there. And what we've done is we've mapped it back to the continuous learning model that we just talked about. So most L&D organizations focus on that internal education circle, the one that's closest to the center of the screen. And we understand why. We mentioned earlier that this is where our comfort zone is. We know how to measure it, we know how to create it, we know how to budget it, all of those good things is in that education circle. But look at the experience and the exposure and the environment circles, and all of the learning methods and the ways to reach and develop learners that are ignored if we ignore those 3 circles. And by the way, experience, exposure, and environment, the things that you can find in those 3 circles, are the things that modern learners want. That's how they want to learn. Also, just a statistic for you here, 6 in 10 executives we surveyed last year feel that their companies are weak at using some of the modern tools like social learning, MOOCs, advanced media, which includes things like videos, gaming, simulations, and those types of things. So we're focusing on that internal circle, and we're weak at using the other things, and because of that, we're probably not meeting the modern learner needs very well. Just take a second and ask yourself, how many of these learning methods can we confidently say we deliver based on our current capabilities? And then take a second and ask yourself, what's holding us back from using more of them? And I'm betting that one of those reasons is probably the technology that's required to utilize some of them. So one of the coolest things about my job is that I get to see all kinds of new learning technologies. And so one of the things that we've been talking about this year is what we're calling the learning tech stack, or the continuous learning technology stack. And what that is it's the sum of all of the technology that organizations leverage for the purposes of learning and developing employees. So in the past, this has revolved mostly around the LMS, in some cases an LCMS, but that's changing because organizations are realizing that having an LMS just isn't enough to make learners happy, the modern learners happy. So what you're looking at on the screen is a first pass at some thoughts we're having about this learning technology stack. Again, it's aligned to the continuous learning model, and what it does is it basically details the types of learning tech that are out there. The items that show up in solid circles are technologies that are purchased for learning. So this includes things like your LMS. You'll see that great big, huge, gigantic LMS at the top. E-learning authoring tools, virtual classroom, basically anything that you purchase as L&D that shows up on your balance sheet falls within this category. And then there are items with white outlines, and those are technologies that aren't necessarily purchased specifically for L&D or for learning or developing people within an organization, but can be leveraged by learning. So this includes things like search software, social networks, things like that. And then the relative size of the circles roughly represents the technology's usage in learning industry. So based on our conversations and what we're seeing, how prevalent is the use of that technology for learning within the organization. It's probably worth noting at this point that, that all organizations have a learning tech stack, but most organizations don't have an intentional tech stack. Most L&D organizations are familiar with the LMS and some of the other tools that are used that hit the budget, but they rarely acknowledge or capitalize on some of the less formal learning technologies that are out there. And a lot of times this is due to L&D not knowing how to leverage them or how to control them. And one thing that we hear quite a bit is how to measure them. So we've drawn a line here. Modern learners are different, and we have to change to accommodate them, we as L&D. To accommodate them, we need to think about using different methods that they're already familiar with and already using, but that we haven't adopted yet. And to use some of these methods, we need new technologies. We have to expand our learning tech stack beyond just the LMS. Unfortunately for unfortunately for L&D, this introduces a huge level of complexity to the control and measure aspect of our jobs. Not everything resides in the LMS anymore, and we need to figure out how to accommodate that. So to start to understand a little bit more of this, we want to review some research on learning measurement that we very recently completed. And for that, I'm going to pass control over to Wendy Wayne-Audia, who will take you through it.
Hello everyone, my name is Wendy Wayne-Audia, and I am the Senior Research Analyst for the L&D space at Burson by Deloitte. So to continue the discussion on what Danny just went over, some of our research and data on how the modern learner likes to learn and leverage different technologies, we're also seeing that organizations are having trouble tracking a lot of the learning because learners are going for the more informal methods. And I'm going to share some data points now from our recent research on learning measurement. In particular, we're going to take a look at some of the difficulties that organizations are facing when it comes to measuring learning that is happening in a more continuous way now. But before I jump into it, I want to give you a quick background on what this study was about. So about a year ago, the summer of 2014, we invited thousands of organizations to take our what we call the State of Learning Measurement Survey. And we got 676 organizations to participate, which is a really great sample size. And the main purpose of the study was to help us understand what were some of the resources, skills, and challenges that companies are facing when it comes to evaluating what their measurement and their learning efforts. And we wanted to understand essentially the state of how organizations were showing the impact they're learning on the business and organizational outcomes. So when we asked organizations what type of learning activities they were tracking, a lot of the responses were quite reflective of what we had expected. Most companies tracked what was readily available in their LMS, courses and activities that were more formal, for example, instructor-led training, classroom-led training, even self-directed training, anything that they could track on their systems, they were, most of them were able to track. But then when we asked about more informal methods, activities that learners and employees were seeking on their own, very few organizations seemed to have the ability to track them. And a lot of that has to do with the challenges that organizations face when it comes to measurement. We asked them what were some of their difficulties, and the inability to capture informal learning is something that's very common for at least half of them. And as you can see, that a lot of these common challenges that are listed here, they're all somewhat related. Not having the right tools to analyze data, having the difficulty to make the connection between the learning that's offered and the business outcomes, not having the necessary integration between systems. These are, you can see how they all parallel. What this also tells us is that organizations need to have the right tools and technology to help them put the pieces together, and in order to get the clear understanding of how learning organizations is helping the performance and business objectives that they're supporting. And when it comes to the challenges of having the tools technology, we dug a little deeper and we asked what organizations were considering the most useful tools when it comes to measuring the learning. And the majority of organizations considered that standard and custom LMS reports and dashboards were the most useful. And as you can see, most organizations also use standard Office tools like spreadsheets and other survey tools such as SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics to track their learning activities. And while a lot of these tools have their purpose and they can be extremely useful when they're used appropriately, they don't necessarily help solve that question and the problem of tracking the learning that employees are seeking on their own. So in order to address this gap and to help answer this question, I'm going to hand this off now to Mike Rustici, who's the president of Rustici Software, and to talk about the solution that his company is providing.
Well, thanks, Wendy. We heard a little bit now about the current state of the world, and we hear about this whole learning tech stack that gives us an untethered, on-demand, collaborative, empowered environment that our learners are demanding. And we hear about the frustrations that the technology isn't available, and learners aren't enamored with their current company offerings, and trying to measure and understand these learning activities that are happening are too hard. The tools aren't there. They can't connect these things to business outcomes, and there's no integration amongst their systems. Well, I want to talk a little bit about how that world is starting to change with some of the underlying technologies that are powering this entire industry, and then some of the new types of tools that are allowing us to put these things together. So this is kind of an illustration on your screen here of the old world and the new world. Our current world is all about users going into an LMS. And if I had to ask you personally, what percentage of what you've learned in your life has come from an e-learning course in an LMS? Nobody can give a straight answer that starts with something greater than 0.00 something percent. It's a small, small fraction, as you can see on the right, of the learning that's really happening within our organization. But we don't really have any exposure to it. We don't have any visibility into what is going on in all of these different types of activities, and we have no way to kind of bring them together. And so we're starting to see a new learning ecosystem emerge that is no longer LMS-centric in the world, wherein we take all of the very different types of learning events that are happening, whether they're formal e-learning type events or classroom training or what have you, or things that are happening on mobile devices or on the job, or things that are happening in a performance support context or on social learning platforms or via video or games or simulations. All of these learning activities now, instead of sending the learner to one place to go learn, which is kind of an unrealistic model of things. We let learners learn in the most appropriate context, whether it be untethered, on-demand, collaborative, empowered, whatever their proper context is. We let learners live there, and then put the tracking of that in the background. Let all of this data feed into a new type of system that's emerging called a learning record store, or an LRS. And a lot of this new model is enabled by something called the Tin Can API, or otherwise known as the Experience API. These two technologies are the same thing. And I'm going to spend a few minutes talking to you about what this technology shift is and what it means in terms of its impacts on the industry. I'm not going to get too far into the weeds as to what Tin Can is. We've got hour-long webinars in and of themselves that talk about that, and if you would like to request a link to one, just put your name into the question box and we'll get you links to more detailed, really in-depth webinars on Tin Can, how it works, and what its impacts are. But I'm going to give you kind of a cursory, high-level overview of its impacts and the changes that are underway to allow us to create environments for the modern learner. So, we ask ourselves, why don't we have the technology that we want? Why do we have technical challenges? Why can't we provide immersive and enabled environments for education, exposure, experience environment? Why is this hard? Well, I contend that a significant barrier to a lot of these things is the tools that are available on our marketplace. And I also like to contend that the tools in a marketplace are defined and confined by the interoperability standard in the industry. And an interoperability standard is simply the way that things work together. And I'll give you an analogy to help you understand that a little bit better. In the world of computer peripherals, things you plug into your computer, the interoperability standard is the USB cable. If you want to sell your product that plugs into a computer on the mass market, it has to work with USB. Well, that means every product is confined by the constraints of that cable, whether it's data transfer rate or power availability, whatever the constraints are of that cable, confine all of the products that are in the marketplace. Well, in our world, in the online training world, the learning world, we have one interoperability standard, and it's called SCORM. And SCORM is now about 15 years old. So think about that. Our entire marketplace and the tools that are available to us are confined by 15-year-old technology. In 15 years, that's 4 generations in the world of technology. Well, what the Tin Can API or Experience API is a modernization of that. It's a new platform that allows all of our tools to communicate and work together to form a larger ecosystem using modern technologies. And this is going to have a tremendous number of ramifications and improvements and innovation in store for our industry in the very near-term future. So a quick bit of history and where Tin Can has come from. Tin Can is a product of the Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative, or ADL, which is part of the United States Department of Defense. They contracted our organization, Rusty Software, to create the initial version of the Tin Can API. So we did that about 3 years ago. We nicknamed it Project Tin Can and produced the Tin Can API. The official name for it in the government programs is the Experience API. You'll hear both terms thrown around kind of interchangeably. The Tin Can hit a version 1.0 a couple years ago, and is really now over the last year or so starting to see a lot of adoption and a lot of different products that are out on the marketplace and ready to be used today, all communicating with each other very richly. So now, to explain the ramifications that Tin Can is going to have on the industry as it starts to catalyze all these new tools that can come to market with updated technology, I like to use a layers of the onion analogy, where we'll talk about the things that are interesting on the surface and then dig into some deeper ramifications of what is going to happen to our industry. So on the first layer, you're going to see in layer 1, you're going to see a lot of tools that should have been available 5 years ago start to emerge. Things like mobile are going to be a whole lot easier to buy plug-and-play tools off the shelf that will fit into your new tin can-based learning ecosystem. Things like games and simulations, simple things like being able to launch content and track it without going into an LMS. Things like that are, the things that you kind of bang your head against the wall and think, why is this so hard in our world, are going to start to become easier. There's going to be a lot more of these tools that every other industry, is able to take advantage of. We're going to start to be able to take advantage of. You're going to see much more innovative authoring tools, the ability to do kind of time-spaced learning and other things like that. On the next layer of the tin can onion is the ability to do a lot more informal learning and to let learners learn in whatever context they would like to, whether it's online or offline, in the real world or in the virtual world, but not necessarily prescribed by an instructor. We're going to be able to capture all of the learning events that are happening out there, whether it's accessing stuff in the SharePoint site or on your video portal or just on YouTube. All of the learning events are now able to be captured and understood. A big change that is enabling this new form of ecosystem where all of these tools are sending data together and having a learning record store at the center of things. The third layer of the tin can onion is the ability for data to be shared amongst different tools. This is going to allow learning record stores to sit there and share data with LMSs or with other learning record stores in other parts of your organization, or even to allow learners to take data with them potentially down the road. It's going to allow us to have all of the data be free. Data is no longer locked up in an LMS where you can only get at it by paying somebody a ridiculous amount of money to write a custom report. The data is inherently accessible. What goes in can also come out and be analyzed and understood. This is opening up a whole world of possibility for analytics and advanced reporting and learning all kinds of very interesting things about our employees, our learners. The final layer of the tin can, and the deepest layer, and one of the most interesting things, is that the tin can API allows us not just to capture data about what learners are doing and what training activities they're undertaking. It also allows us in the same format to capture data about performance and behavior. We can now say, we trained our learners to do this, and then they went and actually did or did not do that. And let's draw some correlations with the way we train people and how they actually performed on the job, allowing us to see if the training and learning environments that we are providing are actually improving job performance. And let's see if we're actually doing our jobs and doing a good job at that. We can now measure that and become much more effective as learners. So what is it? What exactly is the Tin Can API? It's a shared language for two systems to talk about the things that a person does. It is a way of communicating that a learner has taken on these learning activities or done these things. You can think of it as a simple set of sentences of the form, I did this. The Tin Can API allows for tools to say, Mike completed course, Mike scored 95%, or it allows you to say, Mike watched video, Mike attended class, Mike presented webinar, Mike asked question. All of these things can be captured with the Tin Can API. There's essentially a two-party system at work with Tin Can. We have a series of activity providers and then something called the Learning Record Store, the centralized place where all of this data is collected, which may be part of an LMS or it could be an independent tool on its own. So activity providers are things that provide learning experiences or in some other way capture activity that a learner or an individual is undertaking. One of the cool things about Tin Can, first of all, is the number of activity providers that are now already on the market that are generating statements about people via this new format that we can now collect. You get a much, much richer set of data about what learners are doing from Tin Can than you ever could from something like SCORM that mostly limited you to, did they finish it, did they pass or fail, what was their score, and how much time did they spend. Tin Can allows you to capture all of that stuff, but you also get a much richer look. We've got people who are going so far as to enable Tin Can in their actual software application. So we train people on how to use the software application, then we monitor what they've done in the application to see if they've actually did what they were trained. That's just one small example. And you're starting to see in those diagrams of all of the different bubbles, remember in that new learning ecosystem, all of those bubbles are now activity providers that can contribute data about the training that we have to a learning record store. So TinCan is having a profound impact on the learning industry. You know, the tool that we offer that allows you to start taking advantage of a lot of these capabilities is the Watershed LRS, the Watershed Learning Record Store. Watershed is a learning analytics platform that provides you with actionable insights from your training or performance data. This is the way that you collect all of the data that is being gathered and being produced now throughout your entire learning ecosystem and allows you to make sense of it. This technology is now allowing you to learn so many things about your organization that you never thought possible before. You can really take a deep dive into all of the learning that's happening wherever it's happening. You know, these are just some pretty graphs that we have over here showing you different things that you can do with Watershed. We're looking at completion trends in the top right. We're looking at how long learning interventions have an effect for in the middle there on the top. We're looking at just assessments and how they relate to competence on the bottom left there. We can do badging tied in with Mozilla badges. In the middle there, you see that simple statement format of, I did this. And we're looking at different parts of the organization's different sets of competencies over on the right. There's just a small set of simple screenshots, and we've got whole webinars that you can dive into some of these other case studies of how organizations are taking advantage of this new technology and all of this data to give learners a modern learning environment and to have detailed visibility into what is going on and how that is impacting their business. So we want to encourage everybody when they start learning about all of this technology to rethink your learning experience. Danny and Wendy talked about all these great new things that we can do and all the frustrations of the modern learner. And the message I want to send to everybody is that we are no longer limited in our ability to deliver that to the learner. Think from the ground up. Don't be confined by your existing set of tools and what you think is possible, because starting now and especially over the next few years, so many more things are going to start to be possible as a lot of new tools are able to be put onto the mass market thanks to our new interoperability standard. So give the modern learners the continuous learning environment they demand, and while you're doing it, tie all of that learning and training data to real business results. The challenges to measurement that Wendy was talking about, it's too hard. There are no tools out there to do it. We can't connect it to our business outcomes. There's no integration amongst those tools. Those are all going away, and they're going away quickly, and it's going to lead to a tremendous shift in the capabilities that we have and the things that we can do. I've talked to some folks who've been trying to put measurements in place, and they'll spend 3 days a quarter just trying to pull data together to form a spreadsheet that can assimilate all this. All of that can now happen smoothly in real time and be put into an analytics tool like Watershed to give you the information that you need. Many people then often ask, okay, how do I get started? How do we start taking advantage of a lot of these capabilities? The thing I recommend to people is to start by asking a question. What do you want to learn about your organization? If I could learn 1 or 2 things about my training program, what would they be? And then let's form an experiment. Form a hypothesis and create an experiment to go determine whether or not that hypothesis is true or false. And then we can go look at the tools available in your learning ecosystem or on the market that are already generating TinCan statements, or we can make things generate TinCan statements very easily. Bring all that together and start to do some analysis. And by starting small and kind of introducing both the new tracking capabilities and the concept of measuring these and providing a better learning environment for your learners, you can get a really, really big, quick win off of some small early steps to start introducing a lot of this new technology and to prepare yourself for the imminent future where all of this becomes mainstream and the organizations are producing the environment that the modern learner expects and able to provide, take action based on the insights that they are receiving from all of that data. So that's my really quick spiel on TinCan. I'm about to hand it over to Christopher now from Q's, who went ahead and took one of those early first steps, and he's going to tell you a little bit about their case study, what their their problems were, and what they hoped to accomplish, and how they went about that solution, and are having some interesting results because of it. So over to you, Christopher.
Great, thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. A little bit about Q's as a starting point. We are an individual membership association dedicated to educating and developing credit union CEOs, board members, and future leaders. We have a membership base of about 13,000 individuals across the U.S., Canada, and the Caribbean. And because we're focused solely on professional development, educating credit union executives and board members, we offer a wide range of content across channels. We have online learning, we have print materials, we have conferences, meetings, executive education, as well as distance learning. We try to meet our members' learning needs wherever they are. However, like many other associations, we are challenged with ongoing member engagement. We want to engage our members more deeply and in meaningful ways so that they will renew their membership, so they'll recommend us to their colleagues, and so that the association will be strong and grow. One of the ways that we focus on doing that is through helping guide their learning, providing them pathways through all of that content, thousands of pieces of content that we have in classroom learning, in online, in the magazine, and so on. However, trying to report and track that learning has been a challenge. We have always offered online learning as long as it's been available with an integrated learning management system. But really only a small percentage of our members engaged in the courses. Those that did, of course, we were able to report back on the courses they took, where they are on the courses, how they performed on the activities, how they performed on the final assessments. But most of our member activity, which happened on our website, that happened in classroom learning, etc., was not easily tracked or reported. It became most evident in all of the rich content that we have on the Q's.org website. The page that I just brought up on screen is the home page for our Center for Credit Union Board Excellence, which is the home page for a rich source of content related to governance education, governance and strategy, finance, risk management, all the things that a board needs to know in order to best do their jobs. And content is provided in the form of short articles, some online classes, short videos, 3 to 5 minutes in length, and every piece of content has some reflection questions associated with it. It also has learning plans, like the one that I just brought up, which is focused on being an effective board chair. And that we created these learning plans to help people, again, navigate the content of the site. However, because the content is HTML-based, because it's just centered on our website, we could not easily track what people were doing. And somebody would complete the learning plan, or they work through a portion of it, and they'd lose track of where they were in it, or as they were reading content on the website, they forget what they had looked at, and they didn't have any way of reporting back to the board what they had really learned unless they were taking notes or keeping track of it online. And they asked us if there was an easier way to do it. So we began the search. And initially, when we were thinking about this, we were looking at how we might be able to convert some of the content on our website, a small portion, because as I said, we have thousands of pages of content on our site, how we might convert some of that to an online learning platform. But then we came across Tin Can API and Rustici. Tin Can API provided a great benefit to Q's because it allowed us to retrofit Q's.org to track learning. whether it's on the Center for Creating and Board Excellence, or CCUBE as we call it, in our online magazine, and on our online courses, our research library, which has dozens of research reports, online videos. It also allows us to track classroom learning, because as an association, we do offer a great deal of conference material and in-classroom training. But what really caught our attention was the fact that you could track informal learning, that you could focus not just on the education piece of the diagram that Danny showed earlier, but also the experience, the exposure, the environment learning that happens so frequently. Maybe the most common kind of learning that our members engage in, and we weren't able to really track it effectively. Now we can, using what's called the bookmarklet. And the bookmarklet is a simple tool that allows a member, whether they are searching for content on Google or Wikipedia or YouTube, if they go out and they're looking for information about business lending or strategy or payments structures or what have you, all they need to do is click a button. It creates a learning record, and it reports back to Watershed so that they're able to report on all kinds of learning, whether it happens on Qs.org in a formal learning course or independent of that someplace else on the web. The reporting is also simple. This is a screen that's essentially the home screen for reporting. It allows an at-a-glance understanding of how people are learning, whether it's activity streams, type of content that's popular, the content types that are popular, whether it's video or articles or web pages or blogs, shows the most active learners. This is a page that's also customizable. So as we decide other areas that we need to learn about, we can add new cards to this page and make it easy to track that learning. Each of the reports is structured in a similar way. This is a report on the most active learners. And many of the reports look just like this, a bar graph at the top and a bit of a timeline at the bottom of the screen. The bar graph at the top shows the number of learners, that's the blue bars, and the number of activities that they've completed, that's the black line. The bottom of the report shows the top learners, and on the right-hand side, a timeline of when those activities were taking place. Every place a black dot appears on that line is a day when an activity took place, a learning activity took place. If there's a gray circle around a black dot, that shows the amount of activity on that given day. This helps us as we plan our content going forward, because there are times during the years when we know that, for example, board members may be more active, and it gives us a timeline to create new and important content for those members. Also allows us to report on popular content. Again, similar structure. The card on the left is what shows up on the home page for our reporting. The chart on the right shows the type of content that's most popular and when it's occurring. This is important to us because we're able to then create new content around the areas that people are most interested in learning about. If, for example, business lending appears to be a trend, people are starting to pick up and learn more about that particular area, we have a cue then to start to develop additional content in that area. It informs the content that we're developing. It also allows us to use the channel that's most popular. If our members appear to be learning more from videos, we know to create more videos versus online articles. If it looks like they're more interested in taking online courses, we can adapt and create more online courses to meet those needs. And then the learning paths. This is an important piece for us as well because it shows us the direction that people are going in order to learn. What are they learning first, second, third, and fourth? And then we could have a better understanding of how our members learn, not just what they want to learn. Now, the benefits to our members are great. One, and this is key for that member engagement that I was talking about a few minutes ago is motivation. We can gamify our content a little bit. Instead of just going through a learning plan and checking the box, they can complete it and earn an accomplishment and earn badges that they can take with them, that they can post on their LinkedIn profile. It provides accountability. So if somebody is assigned something to do, an article to read on Qs.org, if they're assigned to watch a video, they can demonstrate through Watershed and TNCN API that they've done that. Related to that is regulatory reporting. Because credit unions are highly regulated industry, their examiners, credit union examiners, are very interested in ensuring that boards are participating in ongoing learning. This allows boards to easily show that they're learning, not just in that formal e-learning platform, but they're able to search for and read about or watch or listen to information that is critical to their credit union. They're able to have a flexible learning plan because of the way that they're able to track their learning. And then certification. As they go through and complete those accomplishments, complete learning plans, they're able to earn certifications. There are also benefits to Qs, of course. One is flexibility. As I said, with TNCN API, we were able to go back and instead of importing all of our content, our thousands of pages of content into an e-learning platform, we were able to retrofit Qs.org, take what we had, make it trackable, and make it possible to report on. Analytics. The information that we receive from reporting helps to guide what we're going to develop and the way that we're going to develop it. It also allows us to see where else our members might be learning, whether it's YouTube or Wikipedia or blogs. And we can build collaboration with, in some cases, build collaboration with those other sources of online content. It simplifies the certification process as well from our side. Anybody who has gone through the process of designing and developing a certificate or a certification program knows that the administration workload is great. This eases that burden quite a bit because the tracking is visible to us and we're able to run reports on what people are actually doing towards your certificate or their certification. And finally, and most importantly, is member engagement. The reason that we did this in the first place, the reason that we sought out TNCN API and Watershed is so that we could engage our members better through the gamification process, through accountability, through certificates and certification. We're able to do that more effectively. So it's been a terrific partnership with Rusty on the program. We are still early in the development of it, we're still early in the adoption of it, and are looking forward to building on what we've accomplished thus far. Well, with that, I will pass it back to Danny.
Great. Thank you so much, Christopher and Mike, for giving us the brief rundown on TNCN or xAPI as well as that great case study. I think Qs is a really interesting case for a couple of reasons. First of all, you're a professional organization, so you don't necessarily have people don't have to participate. And so the fact that you're using it to motivate and to hold them accountable and for regulatory reasons as well as certification is very, very interesting. And the way that you talked about utilizing the data that you're getting back to make the experience better is something that I think we could all learn from. So we want to open it up for questions. We have about 10 minutes for questions. I'll be fielding the questions and passing them on to who is the most appropriate answerer. I'll start with this one. Can you take a moment to address why it is important to track and measure informal learning? What are the pros and cons of doing so? I can go ahead and take that one, and then I would also really like Mike's take on this one. From our standpoint, it's obviously been a topic that's been heavily debated in the last few years. Do you need to measure informal learning or do you not? It depends on why you're measuring it. As Q's mentioned, measuring it to make sure that the learner experience is better and making sure that you're doing what you can on the L&D side to encourage and motivate learners, it's a very, very good thing. I personally am not a firm believer in measuring every single thing that learners do for regulatory, well, not regulatory, but for the purposes of measuring or creating an ROI. So I think it's a really delicate balancing act between what you absolutely need to measure and why you're measuring it, as well as what you're going to make available or enable within an organization for the benefit of the learners that are there. Mike, did you have anything to add there?
You know, I think that pretty well covers what all I would have to say. You know, Christopher showed some use cases and things that they were doing over there as well. Yeah, I certainly don't want to give anybody the impression that I'm contending that all informal learning should be tracking. That is absolutely not the case. You know, I'm a geek at heart. You know, I give you the technology that lets you do it when it's appropriate. You know, I do think also there's another kind of use case that may start to emerge, which is, you know, just your own personal tracking of learning experiences, and you know, especially also in this culture where we are increasingly, you know, the Fitbits that are tracking everything that we're doing, and then that we're also sharing all of that stuff on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all of those types of things. I think that there's, you know, potential desire to track your learning things. I know that we've got a couple of guys over here who are super tin can geeks, and they've been tracking a lot of the things that they do as informal learning experiences with some of our own, that bookmark on some of our own internal tools over here, and they've found it useful to, you know, just to be able to go back and reference something. They said, oh, I know I read about something a few weeks ago, let me go back and try to find it.
That's really interesting. Also for the creation of learning tracks or consolidating information that you want to go back to later, it might be a very helpful thing there as well.
Yeah, and another kind of futuristic thing that's been talked about, if people do start to track their learning paths, now that that becomes possible, you know, it's about sharing those learning paths. And maybe, for instance, Malcolm Gladwell is researching his next book, and he kind of shares some of his research as he goes along, and people can kind of follow in his tracks. Or you could, you know, follow learners. You could follow influential people to see what they're reading about, or follow other people who have had success along a path you are trying to take.
That's a great point. So using other people as curators for stuff that you want to learn, that's cool.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, the next question is probably for you, Mike. Have you heard of movements to merge standards such that HRIS, ATS, LMS systems could integrate?
There aren't many formal efforts across a lot of these groups just yet. I would absolutely love to see some of them start to happening. A few points on that, though, so that the tin can specification was actually based off of another specification called activity streams. You've all seen that I did this statement structure before. It's your Facebook wall. Mike posted picture, Beth liked picture, Danny shared picture, whatever it might be. That activity streams format is actually being used to capture all kinds of activity, both on social networks and also within the enterprise now as well. So, you know, we very intentionally tried to align what we were doing in the learning community with the trend across a broader set of standards to at least have the activity tracking side of things be very much aligned, and that effort's paying some dividends already so far. Hopefully those harmonization efforts will continue to allow us to bring a lot more data together.
Great. Next question is probably also for you, Mike. Can you cover how the LRS will relate to the LMS? Do we need
Sure. Sure. So in our original conceptualization of a learning record store, we were trying to write the original draft version of the tin can spec, and we needed a word for the thing to receive all of these statements. And we didn't want to call it an LMS because LMSs are all calling themselves different things now. They're talent management systems and other things. And it didn't have to be an LMS. It could be a student information system or an HR system. So we made up this new word, learning record store. And in our conceptualization of it at the time, it was the part of the LMS that tracks who's done what and implements the tin can API to get that data in or out. Well, you know, as we started presenting this to the world a few years ago, people started really gravitating towards this notion of, you just give me a learning record store. I don't need the full-on LMS. Just give me the learning record store to track all of these things and be the central repository for everything. And so how this is going to shape up in the industry is really interesting, specifically around the question of do we need both and how will they relate to each other. There are many LMSs out there now that have a learning record store built into them. And that is a perfectly legitimate model for deploying all of this stuff, and it will probably be the way a lot of people take their first steps into the Tin Can API. In general, though, those learning record stores embedded into an LMS tend to reflect data at what I call the SCORM parity level. You know, the LMSs have all been designed around this SCORM model of formal e-learning delivered to a learner in a web browser while they're connected to the internet. And so the data and the reports that you tend to see kind of all still try to fit into that legacy LMS model. The independent learning record store tends to be more of a learning analytics tool that allows you to collect all this data from many different places, but to represent it in new ways and to recognize the shift that has happened over the last 15 years. You'll also start to see possibilities where learning record stores can communicate with one another. So you see LMSs that can become activity providers. So the LMS is the thing that delivers formal e-learning and tracks all that and gives you all the good stuff that it has for compliance and regulatory stuff and delivering training. But then it'll feed that data into a learning record store where it's assimilated with the broader set of data. You also start to see how learning record stores can communicate with one another in one department. Many organizations have 8 different LMSs and they don't talk to each other. And those 8 LMSs may be there for good reasons. Each department has their own specific learning needs. Well, with Tin Can now, all that data can feed into a central learning record store and be synchronized across those different systems.
Great. This one is also for you, Mike. Could you please explain the difference between Tin Can API and xAPI?
There's no difference. They are the same thing. Where that came from is the formal requirement that led to that original research project was to develop an API for tracking learning experiences. As we did that, we got all cute and nicked into Project Tin Can and produced the Tin Can API. And people caught on to that really quick and really gravitated towards the work that we were doing. And so, the name Tin Can API got out there and gained a lot of popularity and name recognition, and still today is the dominant name that most people and tools are using. The government officially calls it Experience API. That is the formal name for the specification that is out there. At the end of the day, there are 2 names for the exact same thing, and we really have a lot of confusion in the industry that is kind of unnecessary.
Awesome. Christopher, this one is for you. Are you needing the learning to click on the booklet for the learning records to be created?
Probably are you needing the learner to click on the bookmark list?
Learner.
Yes. So it's a self-reporting. So it's not automatic. If they choose to report it, they may.
Okay. Another similar question: what did you have to do to make the content to make it trackable?
That's a process that we've gone through with our web team and Rust-C working in tandem, side by side. So it has taken a fair amount of work to get it so that it can be trackable. About a 6-month process for us from beginning to end. Sorry, Mike?
I was going to just add a couple other notes on that.
Yeah, please do.
There's one great thing about the way Tin Can works in that you can choose to make content trackable or to not make it trackable and have something else report that statement. So in the instance of that bookmark that you see, the learner can click on that bookmark and track any content, even though that content hasn't been explicitly converted into Tin Can format or something along those lines.
That's a good point. Thank you.
Okay, next question. How is the data you get from the LRS different than web traffic data that you could get from a web analytics tool such as Google Analytics?
The main difference there is the identification of a learner and their individual path through things. Something like Google Analytics is an anonymous type thing that just provides data in aggregate. So some of that stuff, yes, you could get from Google Analytics, but if you want to get down to the individual learner level, we also have some more specific learning type data being recorded in Tin Can. Simple things like a score. But then you can also map Tin Can statements back to competencies and things along those lines as well. That statement structure of I did this, instead of 3 clauses, is really about 7 or 8 in there that we can get into on a more technical type of call.
Great. It looks like we have time for just about one more question. Here it is. what is the process for setting up xAPI? Do companies do it themselves? Do they need to work with consultants or vendors to do it? How difficult is it?
Yeah, so great question, and there's a lot of different answers for this. At its simplest, there are two different tools that you would need. You would need an activity provider that's making statements. Many tools off the shelf are doing that. Articulate Storyline, Captivate, Lectora, Zebra Zaps. A lot of the familiar tools that you already have out there, well, you can buy off the shelf and they can start making statements. And then you can buy a learning record store. We offer Watershed as our paid offering. We have a free one in our SCORM Cloud product that you can use to start capturing statements. There's 3 or 4 other vendors and some open source offerings out there as well. So you need those two things. And when you do that, you're starting with xAPI. You're capturing data with that new standard. But the question is that interesting? You get some benefits there, like Storyline. You can go take that onto your iPad, and that's a big step forward now that you have TinCan. To take that next level, where you want to start, tracking things from tools that may not be making statements yet because the industry is still new and evolving, yeah, you do need some help there to make things start to generate statements. It's not a very difficult process. The difficult part isn't the technological conversion. It's actually a very, very simple thing to do. The harder part is figuring out what to say. TinCan is very open, and it's important to follow some best practices so that, in one place you don't say Mike watched video, and another place you say Mike viewed video. So it's important to, tie into people who are familiar with the ecosystem to work with them and make sure you're doing things the right way. People can do that themselves internally as developers. There are consultants and vendors out there that will do it for you. Give us a call if you want help with that, and we can point you. We can either do that or point you to the right people that do it. It's not very difficult from a technical perspective. We found that if we look at Christopher's 6 months, I'm just going to speak off the cuff here without knowing the actual details. I imagine a large part of that was getting access to the right tools and figuring out what to say versus the actual work of writing the code to make the statements. So it's not terribly difficult from a technical perspective, but anytime you're going to try to change some software in the enterprise, there are things that get in the way.
Great. It looks like we're at time. In fact, just about a minute over. I just want to remind you that any questions that have not been answered will be answered in email, and we'll send those out to the people who participated on the webinar. We want to thank, again, the people who gave their time today to be here. Wendy Wang-Adia, Mike Rustacey at Rustacey Software, and then Christopher Stevenson with Q's. We really appreciate the insight that you were able to provide for us. Thank you so much for joining us.